First of all, this confession reading is actually about a first time, so if you are not really interested in hearing about graphic 14-year-old boy on boy sex, you probably should leave now. You get 7 tequila shots lined up in the bar. The other thing that I'd like to say is that this 14-year-old boy is now, like me, a 40-year-old man who is actually not out. Strangely so, and so I've changed the name and a couple of details because I know this is being recorded, and I'm Facebook friends with lots of friends from high school who will remember our 6th grade Spanish teacher, Mrs. Persico, who you'll hear about in a minute. And then the other thing is that I want to dedicate this reading to all the angels in America, past and present, living and dead, who still bless us, and that reference will make sense if it doesn't already by the end of my remarks. This piece is part of this new book, Stonewall's Children. It will be in some iteration, and it's called Coming of AIDS. The first time I fucked a guy, I thought I was going to die. I'd been raised very Catholic, and in that world, then as now, homosexuality was among the worst of sins. Perhaps not as bad as murder or abortion, which of course the church likens to murder, but definitely worse than self-fornication, which my father once assured me would result in blindness. Despite the dire warnings from my priests and my parents, I masturbated much of my way through middle school. In fact, when I had glasses in 7th grade, I saw it as a clear sign that God was already beginning to exact his vengeance upon me for my nightly sins. I even resorted to jerking off under thick blankets as efficiently as possible in the hope that he wouldn't catch me. And by the time I first encountered a dick other than my own, in July of 1985, I was already stroking on very thin ice. It was hot as hell that summer, the kind of hot that made adolescent boys smell even funkier than normal. In those pre-deodorant days, no amount of Polo cologne could have spared those around me, but believe me, I gave it my best shot. It didn't help that I'd taken up sports, anytime, anywhere. I always carried a bottle of Polo cologne in my gym bag. This, of course, should have been another sign, though not one from God. After my practices and games, I would apply the cologne liberally, as I do all things. The more I sweat, the worse I smelled, the more spritzes I sprayed. It wasn't long before my father had just had enough of this. "Jesus Christ, you smell like a French whore," he would often exclaim. I don't know what that meant. No one in my family had ever been to France, and I certainly didn't appreciate my devout Catholic father's hypocrisy by taking the Lord's name in vain. But then again, Dad was Irish, so I learned early on to pick my battles. Thank God we had a swimming pool. Though it took years for me to figure out why my lovely mother so strongly encouraged me to go for a swim every time I walked through the front door during summers in middle school, I realize now that chlorine probably saved our family back then from my natural fragrances as well as Ralph Lauren's manufactured ones. But come fall, she too had had more than enough. I returned one day from school to find a big stick of fresh scent Right Guard on my bedroom dresser. Mom was the kinder, subtler parent. Emmanuel was also an adolescent jock, though I remember he smelled more like sweet lotion than sweaty cologne. We met for the first time in Senora Persico's 6th grade Spanish class. See, I told you she'd make an appearance. Emmanuel was the new kid, introduced to all of us as Manolo, which is Spanish for God is with us. Several kids snickered, partly, I'm sure, because his Spanish name sounded like a mix of cooking oil and the Latin boy band that was popular at the time. And partly because it was beyond the mental and spiritual capacities of my white classmates to imagine God in the image of a 14-year-old black kid. He seemed terrified, silent, serious, sullen. And who could blame him? He had transferred to our upstate suburban middle school from New York City, a place I had visited several times as a child, where classrooms no doubt looked a lot different from the one in which he was now sitting. There was an empty desk next to me. Both of our last names ended in M. and I was never more grateful for alphabetical seating. Hola, Manolo, I blurted out like some culturally oversensitive suburban welcome wagon. Yo soy Timoteo! Emmanuel looked me up and down. My V-neck sweater vest and thin lace docksiders were clearly no match for his velour sweatsuit and fat-laced Adidas sneakers. And then he responded, "I'm not Spanish, hombre." I muttered some awkward defense about how I knew that, but Senor Persico wanted us to hablamos español in clase. Eventually, he smiled at me with a mix of caution and pity. I fell immediately in love. Though my attraction to Emmanuel had many sources, he was new and cool, tough and elusive, smart and beautiful, our relationship was forged initially by a different kind of desire. You see, I needed a Spanish tutor, and Emmanuel, the New Yorker, was virtually fluent. After a bit of pressure, Senor Persico let us team up in the Spanish language lab, Manolo y Timoteo. Together we breezed through lessons and then replaced the Spanish language cassettes with mixed tapes of rap music that his buddies had sent him from New York. Emmanuel and I would write notes back and forth about which songs we liked and why, and always in a chicken scratch Spanglish to give us cover if we were ever caught. I spent many hours in my basement copying Emmanuel's mixtapes on my dual cassette boombox, and many more hours in my bedroom jerking off to thoughts of Emmanuel and me breaking it down as DJs scratched and MCs flowed in the background. I'll admit that I still get a little horny when I hear old school hip hop. My relationship with Emmanuel wasn't all language lessons and mixtape masturbation. You see, in addition to being a Spanish whiz and a pioneering connoisseur of rap, he was also a spectacular athlete, and my father was the high school basketball coach. I can only imagine how excited my father must have been when he saw this young brother from Brooklyn play ball for the first time. His lightning first step, his long arms, his lanky torso, his large feet seemingly made of springs, but they had much more in common than hoops. My father had grown up in and around New York City and was always eager for conversation about the place. Emmanuel had lost his father early on, and he was eager for the type of coaching and mentoring that my father was famous for giving his players. My mother loved Emmanuel too, and his mother me. We were both only children and very clearly mama's boys. And it wasn't long before our mamas started referring to each of us as second sons. Over those years, from the early fall of 1983 to the spring of 1985, we became the brothers we always wanted. We would later joke about this, being brothers from another mother, and it felt good to laugh about such things rather than labor over them for too long. It was no surprise to anyone that when my parents told me I could invite one of my friends for a trip to Disney World that summer after 8th grade, I chose Emmanuel. My family didn't have much money. My mother was terrified of flying, so we drove from Albany to Orlando. Our white Dodge Airy station wagon had no air conditioning or FM radio, twin disasters that produced two increasingly disgruntled teenagers. Emmanuel and I spent much of the trip with the windows rolled down and our Walkmans over our ears, our gangly legs entangled as we searched in vain to find more room for bodies that we could barely contain. Such proximity was hard. And I mean that quite literally. As we drove south, we kept getting erections, often at the same time. Now, anyone who spent more than an hour in the company of an adolescent boy knows that this is perfectly normal. 14-year-old boys get hard brushing their teeth. But this was different. We were aroused. As you can imagine, this was hardly an ideal situation. Emmanuel and me jammed into the back of an Aries wagon, broad daylight, my parents positioned comfortably in the front seats, perfectly oblivious to the hormonal hell being experienced by these two overheated adolescents with chronic, raging boners. We decided to handle the situation as best we knew how, by comparing dick sizes. We put a blanket over our heads and our bodies, we pitched our own tent, as it were, rubbed our crotches aggressively to make sure that we were putting our best dicks forward, and then whipped them out. In retrospect, this was fucking crazy. But it made perfect sense to us right then and there. His was longer and darker. Mine was thicker and pinker. Both had impressive heads, at least for that age. I was pleased, even relieved, to see that I measured up, and I suspect he felt much the same way. Of course, this was before we learned fully about black myths and Irish curses. Boys are funny about their penises. The only thing better than playing with your own is the visual confirmation that yours compares favorably to the others in the room, or in this case, the car. We checked each other out for a couple of minutes, long enough to know that we liked what we saw, and then we put our junk back in our trunks, removed the blanket, put the Walkmans back on, and stuck our heads nearly out the window like a couple of unhinged puppies in heat. As it turned out, all this happened as we were entering South Carolina. When my parents stopped to fill up at south of the border, the most terrifying and creepy place I've ever been in my life, Emmanuel and I exploded from the car and ran into the back bathroom, sat in separate stalls, and quickly emptied our own tanks. Either that or explode. As we got back into the car, we noticed the sandy-haired, blue-eyed gas station attendant with Jose on his name tag. Weirdly, they all had Jose on their name tag. He was frowning at us. Not a grumpy, I hate my job kind of frown, but the far more menacing, I hate you kind. The kind that native Yankees sometimes get when they travel together, white with black, love Mason-Dixon. It was the first time it had occurred to either Emmanuel or me that Dixie might be different. Fortunately, though, our final destination was Disney, where dreams really do come alive. The first night in Florida was the most terrifying and thrilling of my life. We laid there on the queen-size bed in silence, near darkness, my heart racing, sweat running down my face and my chest and my crotch as if my body were kind of in-house hot spring. I was hard again, but this time barely breathing. I thought Emmanuel might be asleep until he said it's too hot for clothes. With this, he kicked off the covers, pulled off his shorts, took off his shirt. This was the first time I had ever seen another boy naked. It was exquisite. His sinewy body was smooth and soft, with patches of tightly coiled black hair just visible beneath his armpits and around his swelling cock. He was skinny, skinnier than me, and this too was a delight. I looked at him, awkward and anxious, as I slowly removed my clothes as well. I felt free. Then I panicked. In something like a post-lapsarian spaz attack, I rolled over on my stomach and turned away from him. I couldn't look at him anymore, or perhaps I didn't want him to look at me. Who knew? "What's wrong?" he whispered. "Nothing," I shot back. "Good night." Truth is, I didn't know what the fuck to do. I had never been this naked, this close to anyone, boys or girls. Sure, I kissed a few girls, even tongue. And I had copped a feel or two in a movie theater, really awkwardly, but only with the good Catholic girls who would never, ever, thank God, let you touch them underneath their clothes, or, God forbid, without them. Sure, I had bragged about getting some to my boys in the locker room, but we all know that boys tell the biggest lies about girls in the locker room. I was no different. Now, Emmanuel and I were in the bedroom. I regretted ever bringing him. I wanted to go home now, throw away all those goddamn mixtapes and forget anything, that any of this had ever happened. My meltdown was accompanied by several long minutes of silence, the devilish kind of silence that leaves just enough room for sinful thoughts. I laid still hard, barely breathing. I heard a raw, soft rustle of the sheets, then the heat of his body next to mine, his right leg over my left one, his penis pressed up against my pelvis, moving slowly across my ass. He was on top of me now, my dick jammed into the mattress beneath me. "Spread him," he whispered in my ear. "No, you," I whispered back. He reached down and spread my ass apart, gently. Put his cock where we both wanted it to go. Not in, not yet, but near, next to, up against, as close as it could be without really hurting. Then he began to move his hips back and forth, up and down, quick as hell, quiet as he could. Then he began, I felt the friction, it felt fantastic. But my parents were in the next room and the door wasn't even locked. Fuck! I wanted to be asleep, alone, but I was awake and I was aroused. Back and forth, up and down, quicker now, still as quiet as we could possibly be. Our breathing converged, our hands clenched, our legs tangled up again, different this time. Not sure how long this would last. I loved it. Broke his rhythm, jerked several times, and collapsed on me. The sweat between his chest and my back sucking us together. 15 minutes of fabulous. When Emmanuel finally rolled over, I escaped to the bathroom. I reached back and I felt it all over my ass. I reached forward and stroked myself with his until I produced a load of my own. I stood over the toilet, wet, withered, wilting, wanked out. And I heard my mother's sweet, familiar voice in the hallway. You okay, honey? I took a deep breath. Fine. The reality was I wasn't fine, and I wouldn't be for quite some time. The blood had really freaked me out. That night during my trip to the bathroom was the first time I'd ever found blood in my ass. This could only mean one thing. I was going to die. The most terrifying thing was I felt that I deserved to die. As a kid growing up in the Catholic Church, you learned 3 things about sex. 1, when married people have sex, they have a child. 2, when unmarried people have sex, they commit a sin. And 3, when gay people have sex, they go to fucking hell. No pleasure, just means to an end. Predestination by another means, by another name. This was a simple truth that had been fed to me alongside the wine and wafer for as long as I could remember, and there was no escaping that truth. Therein lie the problem. The other truth, my truth, blood notwithstanding, is that I loved having sex with Emmanuel, and he seemed to enjoy having sex with me as well. That Disney vacation changed my life. Each subsequent night, both of us naked, more of the same, back and forth, harder and deeper, top and bottom, the definition, I suppose, of what we would come to later call versatile. In terms of quantity, if not quality, it was probably the best single week of sex I've ever had in my life. But I really couldn't get the blood out of my head. Around the same time that Emmanuel and I began our affair, one that would last nearly 10 years. Homosexuals were starting to die in droves from a disease called AIDS, commonly referred to as the gay plague, or worse. At the time, none of us knew much about AIDS, other than you could catch it through a combination of bodily fluids like blood and saliva and semen. Fucking and sucking, especially the kind that Emmanuel and I were doing, was a short death sentence back then, but kissing and sneezing and sweating were considered risky too. And none of us was immune to the widespread public panic. Prejudice and prophylactics seemed to be everywhere. The churches were among the most dire doomsayers for many of them, Catholics and evangelical Christians most of all. Homosexuality was a form of moral depravity, and AIDS was, quote, God's wrath against homosexuals. I heard these mortality plays over and over again from various pulpits. It was like mass-induced mindfuck. And each time it penetrated a little harder and stung a little deeper. Of course, the full weight of the Catholic Church's hypocrisy, insofar as people like me are concerned, would not reveal itself until much later on, when the world finally discovered the real plague of pedophilia, something altogether different from homosexuality and AIDS, that had been infecting the Catholic priesthood and threatening to kill it long before I ever discovered any blood in my ass. There was only one way to deal with all this: fuck the church and find another way to explain what the hell was going on. And that's just what I did. Each Sunday, I would sit in the pews and I would tune everything out, dead to the world. After my confirmation, required by my parents, I even stopped going to communion. No more Jesus' body and blood for me. All the while, Emmanuel and I continued to build a secret life together, even as we denied its many risks. Despite the fear we felt, we found that desire almost always trumped reason when it came to matters of the flesh between us. We would sleep over each other's houses, summer camps, cheap motels, and we would steal away locker rooms, bathrooms, wooded areas. We even arranged our schedule so that we could have gym class during the same period. Our football coach was our phys ed teacher, and he frequently let us go off and play our own basketball games, which invariably ended with a very different kind of one-on-one for the next class. When we both made the varsity basketball team, my father's basketball team, we initiated a new kind of pregame ritual. Emmanuel would come over to our house every Tuesday and Friday afternoon so we could take a nap and then shower together before catching a ride with my father back to school. It's like the beginning of a bad porn. In retrospect, it's hard to believe that we never got caught. We were pretty clever, and we counted on the fact that it never even occurred to anyone in our town that we were doing anything out of the ordinary. I suppose it didn't hurt that we had pretty popular girlfriends for most of high school and college, the perfect beards to hide our increasingly brazen sexual trysts. Without question, my greatest regrets from that period of my life, and there are many, involve the girls, now women, that I lied to along the way, some of whom I genuinely loved, nearly as much as I loved Emmanuel. Closeted gay men, especially those like us, who could more easily pass, are often terrible abusers of straight women. As ashamed as I am to admit that, I see it clearly now. And I can also see clearly that Emmanuel and I had convinced each other, just as we'd fooled so many others, that we were doing nothing wrong, that no one would get hurt, and that we were not homosexuals. As long as we kept it between the two of us, which we did for many years, we could continue to pretend to be straight. But all this deception was its own kind of private hell. Throughout those years, I was torn apart by the terrible inner suspicion that I was indeed a homosexual. Not just Emmanuel's friend, but a full-blown fucking faggot. I began to check out other boys in the locker room, to fantasize about the athletes I read in Sports Illustrated, Michael Jordan, Ryan Bosworth, Bo Jackson. Whew. But these weren't the only images that struck me. I also found myself drawn to the increasingly frequent coverage in print and on TV of those who were dying of AIDS. The gay men, now numbering in the tens of thousands, with emaciated torsos and sunken cheeks and purple lesions and wheezing coughs. These people terrified me, precisely because I was still so afraid that I would someday share their fate. During my high school junior year, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Amazed that our public school's health curriculum made no mention of AIDS, like the Catholic Church had emphasized abstinence over contraception insofar as it ever talked about sex, I decided to use my position as front page editor of our school's newspaper to do an investigative report on how other schools in our area were addressing these topics in their curriculum. Turns out more of the same. I wrote a scathing piece claiming that these high schools, including my own, were failing their students by not teaching them the dangers of AIDS and the importance of safe sex, a relatively new concept at the time that I had yet to fully adopt in my own personal life. The article made quite a splash. One of Governor Mario Cuomo's education deputies even referenced it in a weekend talk show, and it earned me accolades that significantly enhanced my college applications projects. But there was the tragic irony at the core of my tortured teenage existence. Celebrated publicly for calling out what the very thing that I didn't have the courage to confront privately. Here I was demanding better AIDS education, even as I refused to learn its lessons. Here I was challenging stigmas surrounding homosexuality, even as I denied my own homosexuality because of internalized stigma. And here I was advocating safe sex practices, even as I failed to use condoms in my own sex life, especially with Emmanuel. I was a champion hypocrite. And truth is, I hated myself for it. I wish I could say things got better after high school, but I'd be lying. College was an even deeper closet. I limited myself to girlfriends, though thankfully I began using condoms on a regular basis. But my encounters with Emmanuel were less frequent, mostly holidays and summers, and frankly, far less satisfying. The closet was taking its toll on both of us, mostly because neither of us would acknowledge that we actually were locked inside it. Turns out we would need others to unlock the door for us. For me, at least, this process began over Christmas my senior year of college. I was home for break, and Emmanuel and I had gone out drinking with friends. At 3 a.m., we stumbled home. I was horny. He was reluctant. He kept insisting, I'm not really like that anymore. After a big fight, I think I called him a cocksucker, which technically was not a lie, we ended up in bed together again. As we were fooling around, he stopped me. He lifted my head, and he asked me to kiss him. In all those years, this was the first time we had ever kissed each other. I told him I loved him, and this too was the first. In the morning, his mother cooked us breakfast. Manuel was in the bathroom, and she sat down with me at the table. Baby, can I tell you something? She asked. I nodded. I saw you and Emmanuel sleeping in bed together this morning. Seeing my shock, because this was the first time anyone had ever acknowledged what we had, she added quickly, I just wanted to tell you how much I love you for loving my son. I know he doesn't always show it, but he loves you too. She stood up from the table, she put her hand on my shoulder, and she kissed me on the top of the head, like my own mother might have. Smiled softly, choking back tears. In the fall of 1993, shortly after moving to New York City to start graduate school, I went to see the first installment of Tony Kushner's epic two-part play, Angels in America. I was blown away by what can only be described as a theatrical miracle. What struck me most, however, was not the play itself, but the audience that came to see it. Gay and straight folks, men and women, people of all different racial and ethnic backgrounds, who, like the play's main character, Friar Walter, had so far survived the AIDS crisis. When the lights to the Walter Kerr Theater came up, everyone around me was in tears. Not the kind of tears that merely dampen the cheeks, but the kind of tears that roll down like waterfalls. Kind of tears that I had wanted so desperately to shed that morning at breakfast with Emmanuel's mother. I was just now learning how to cry. At the end of Perestroika, the second half of Angels in America, Friar Walter speaks directly to the audience, to us. He says, this disease will be the end of many of us, but not nearly all. And the dead will be commemorated and will struggle on with the living, and we are not going away. We won't die secret deaths anymore. The world only spins forward. We will be citizens. The time has come. The time had certainly come for me to love Emmanuel and myself enough to let go and move on, to get my shit together and start practicing safe sex, to stop lying to people I loved and come out, albeit on my own terms and at my own pace, and to stop living in fear of what I was working so hard to make inevitable. Coming of age is easy, is never easy, and AIDS certainly made it more difficult for many of us. It damaged an entire generation, but it did not nearly destroy it. And I thank God for that now, because there are so many of us who are lucky as hell to be living.